Good morning, everybody. This is John. Welcome to the BWO NCGA Valent Ag Weather Outlook, February 18th, 2017. Well, most areas it's amazingly mild. It's really pleasant weather out there. Time to get out and do some field work. Enjoy the mild weather. But I put in here misleading signs of early spring because usually when we get this type of weather in mid-February, it doesn't last. And we'll look into that. So any more snow? We sure haven't had much snow in most areas of the Corn Belt. Some areas have, but many areas have not received hardly any snow. And also some areas have been very dry, and I'm getting more and more of a concern for those areas. So over the last 7 days, here's where some precipitation fell. Just some light rain and some light snow over the middle part of the nation, the Midwest. We did receive some up to about a half inch in spots here and there, but most of the significant precipitation was to our south in Oklahoma and Texas. Now, if we look at the snow on the ground, really it's hard to find unless you go into parts of North Dakota, northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin. And even in that area, that you look at this orange here, and this is very active melting. So, I talked about that the last number of weeks or maybe even month, how there were these holes in the snowpack, and once it started melting, it'd go very quick. We're going to lose that. That snowpack is going to be gone. So then the question becomes, will we get more snow, which could produce a vulnerability for spring flooding if we'd get a late season snow. But this is definitely reducing the potential for spring snowmelt flooding, getting the snow melted and out of the way. Now, right now, the areas in orange, I've showed this the last couple briefings because I find it very interesting and relevant. We don't have nearly as much snow on the ground that we normally would this time of the year. That's the area in orange. So that's saying we have less snow. The reason why, temperatures have been very mild. It's also been dry in many spots, but this was over the last 7 days. And look how unusually mild it was for parts of the upper Midwest. We're looking at 10 to 15 degrees above normal. So we're in a very mild period right now and unusually mild. Now, I mentioned I did have some concern for soil moisture. And right now, these are the areas, particularly in red, but if you look at sort of that darker shading as well, right in here, this sort of a brownish color. So sort of in this area, right in here, is the area I have the greatest concern, some really dry soils. It extends a little bit further off into the eastern Corn Belt in this area as well, and you've heard me say many times what I like to see is I like to see sort of this light green over the area. This is sort of ideal when you get the light green. This is when it's too wet, the blue, but the light green is saying have a little bit surplus of soil moisture, and I like to see that. So we look at the maximum consecutive days out of the last 30 days. The darker shades of brown are saying 20 out of 30 days have been dry, so we're definitely in that type of dry trend. And frankly, I would like to see us get some above normal precipitation over many parts of the Corn Belt prior to this time of year. Not right when we get into the time we want to get into the field, but right now would be a good time to get that extra precipitation, either rain or snow. Okay, now when I get into the briefing, what I'm going to be showing you, we looked at this Eastern Pacific Oscillation earlier this winter, and basically it's positive right now, and it looks like it's going to go transition into negative. So when I see these strong transitions, what it usually does, it almost always brings us a change in temperature, but typically it also gives us a chance of some enhanced precipitation, but not always. So Eastern Pacific Oscillation, what that usually results in, or what that always results in, it's an indicator of a ridge of high pressure off the west coast up into the Gulf of Alaska in the Pacific. And when that ridge pushes to the north, we get a dip in the jet stream over the U.S., and it brings in colder air. So let's see if that's really what we're seeing. Well, here's the jet stream this first 5 days here, and nothing but mild. Looks like for the first 5 days, enjoy the mild weather. Unusually warm temperatures will continue, but there will be a storm track. Actually, 2 storm tracks. This one will be late this week. This one, you think it's the same one, but this is actually early to middle of next week. So we have 2, and the blue lines here, these are temperature lines. So red is basically above freezing, blue is below freezing. And you can see not a whole lot of cold air behind this first one. Then we get a second one. And what this is saying is that's that transition. It's going to take a while, but we're going to be gradually transitioning from that positive to a negative EPO. Now this week, as far as precipitation, the story without a doubt is going to be the West Coast over parts of California. Right now it's over the southern part of California, but it's going to shift over to the northern part of California. Not only has that reduced all drought, it has now gone from drought to flood in that region. Also parts of eastern Texas and along the Gulf Coast. And there will be some modest precipitation over parts of the Corn Belt, primarily over parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and parts of the Great Lakes. Now, you might think, is snow done? Well, right now I would say no. And I sort of speak from a climatological perspective, but I'm also speaking of looking at these models, getting into this negative EPO and the transition. This is late in the period. This is actually into the latter part of February, and it's been persistent. Now, certainly don't get hung up on this alignment and these amounts. This is way out there, and I would never give this much confidence. But it is saying that when we get into this negative EPO and the cold air starts working in late in the month of February or early March, we do have a chance of some more snow. Now we get into the February 23rd through 28th, and here's that ridge of high pressure. It's building up into the Pacific. That's that negative EPO. Cold air has filtered in. Right now, it's pushed a little bit to the west, and the reason I say it's sort of important is because that might keep the coldest air west, and the eastern part of the Corn Belt could really not feel the impact of this EPO for a while until it gradually works a little bit more to the east. So when I'm talking about this transition for parts of the central and eastern Corn Belt, it's going to be a while. Matter of fact, if we look into the end of February into early March, days 11 to 15, you can see that it is still a negative EPO with this ridge here and this dip here. But if we look at the temperatures, they haven't moved much. Sort of a dividing line, west to east. The cold air still staying off to the west. Okay, so week one, precipitation anomalies. Here we go. Fairly quiet week. Some lighter precipitation here and there. Week two, again, nothing all that exciting. So right now, even though I do see those two storm systems moving through that will bring us some interesting weather and even some chance of some snow, I do think that nothing major at this time. Now looking a little bit further out, this is where I think it might get a little bit interesting. Weeks 3 and 4, we'll have to see how this goes. But right now, look at weeks 3 and 4. Models are indicating and outlooks are indicating that cold air does finally move off to the east and does bring some of that cold air down. My experience is that usually when that pattern of that trough is maintained, that cold air usually does get down to our area. But now we're looking at March here, so you know how intense that cold air will be, and looking at the past trends of how it's moderated, and that we're not going to probably have much snow on the ground. It's probably not going to be all that intense, but it is interesting that it shows that. So anyway, enjoy the mild weather. It's going to last for a while. If you're in the eastern Corn Belt, it's going to last probably for the most of the rest of the month. But we're going to start a transition. There will be some systems moving through, one late in the week, and then another one over a week from now. So those are out a ways, but that will start to usher in some cooler air into the western Corn Belt. And then possibly let's look at maybe this transition a little bit more into the area, some colder air, more like winter again in March. But that's out there, and I think we have time to look at that. Also, I don't see much improvement in the dry soils over areas that have been dry, and other areas that have been in pretty good shape, I see, generally speaking, getting drier. Hope you all have a great week, and we'll be talking with you again next weekend.